Welcome to the creative community. I'm your host, David Starkey, and my guest this time is David Keith. David, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, now, David, if people are watching up in Santa Barbara, they may recognize your face from the news.
Unfortunately, yeah, I think they probably they might
and they're going to be like, well, where have I seen that guy? And they're going to know that you were the public information officer for the Oxnard Police Department.
For
how long?
I was with the department for 28 years, but about 18 of those I was what they call a PIO, or the spokesman for the department. And unfortunately, it's a busy place. We have a lot of activity.
Right.
A lot of stuff goes on in Oxnard. So anytime anything significant happened on a police level, I was typically called out and had to handle that. So it would pop up on Santa Barbara KEYT and
Tracy Laird call you up.
Tracy and I know each other very well, and have known each other for 35 years. And she's always a terrific reporter to work with up there. But so people in Santa Barbara definitely know me.
Know you.
People in Ventura too, a little bit, but probably more in Santa Barbara.
Yeah. Well, people in Ventura who watched local cable will be
sure.
They'll be like, that's the street beat guy.
That's the guy. Yeah.
And that was you said 30 years. How long were you?
30. We went. Let's see. The first show aired, and then, by way of background, this was something the Oxnard Police Department produced. First police department in the country to do it, and we started in August of 1985.
Wow.
So it's scary to think it's
that's
been 35 years now almost. And we went on we did 1,200 weekly shows, so it went on for a couple of decades, and I hosted it and had a great time doing it. And it was a tool to educate the Oxnard community, Oxnard, Port Hueneme, El Rio, Silver Strand, Hollywood Beach. So it was a little more than just Oxnard, but the surrounding areas, but not Ventura, not Santa Barbara.
Okay.
And we basically came out, it was on basically on Monday nights, and we would educate the community about what crimes were happening, where they were happening, which was of great interest to people, showing maps and stuff, and then, but most importantly, how to prevent it. So if we saw a rash of car break-ins or burglaries or armed robberies over the previous 7 days, because we would give a 7-day update every Monday, I'd say, look, if you live in this area, this neighborhood, or if you have a business down here or whatever, your kids go to school over here, be aware that over the last week we've had 15 break-ins in that neighborhood. And this is how the people are breaking in. This is how the bad guys are operating. And most importantly, again, how to prevent it.
Right.
And we put that information out. It was a live call-in show, which was a lot of fun. And so it was very spontaneous, and I could really kind of flow with it. And people that were watching would know, okay, well, I live in that neighborhood. I'm going to take the precautions that he suggested. They did it, and we saw
burglaries went way down.
Burglaries that was probably the most dramatic effect was on burglaries. We had about an 85% decline per capita in the number of residential burglaries over the course of the 20-something years the show was on. Yeah.
So, doing live TV, especially live local TV, you never know who the heck's going to call in, right?
True, absolutely.
I mean, without knowing this is a family show, so you can't use certain words. But what are some of the craziest calls that you can remember over those 30 years?
Well, let me preface it by saying when I started the show, I had dark brown hair, okay, and it's no longer dark brown hair. 90% of the calls or 95% of the calls were very legitimate, people concerned, I live in this area, or can you tell me how, I worry about my kids, I'm worried about my wife or my husband or my business, whatever. But every once in a while I would get kind of a crazy call. I had a woman one time call me up, and she said, she goes, I have a complaint. And I said, okay, well, you've called the right place. I'm the guy. And people always were calling and asking me or complaining about stuff. And she goes, I have a complaint, and I'm just hoping that you can address this. I said, what's going on? And she says, well, when I drive to work in the morning, I go down Vineyard, and this won't make sense to most people in Santa Barbara, or maybe not even Ventura, but Vineyard's a main drag kind of near the freeway, the 101 freeway. And she goes, there's those two tall buildings, the two big, tall bank buildings that everybody sees going down the 101. She goes, when I drive in the morning, the sun is reflecting off one of them because it's a mirrored building, and it gets in my eyes, and I'm just wondering what can be done about this. And I remember thinking, you bite your tongue. I mean, I had a lot of comments or comebacks I could make to that, but I said, well, fortunately, the sun will be rising later in the day. You can adjust your time of, go a different route. But I wanted to say, lady,
what do you want me to do up the bank building?
If I had the power of doing that, I wouldn't be on this local cable show for Oxnard PD. But I always remember that, and I think about it every time I drive by those two buildings. Yeah.
What sort of feedback did you get from the officers in Oxnard? I mean, I assume they're pretty supportive.
They're very supportive. It was interesting. All of them were supportive, but not all of them wanted to go on the show, because sometimes I'd bring an officer on to talk about his or her experiences, or maybe give some advice, because you get tired of hearing me. So I'd bring on an officer. Most were fine with it, but I did have a few that were very camera shy, I guess, and so I had to work with them a little bit. But it was fine. I mean, I had guests on all the time, and I think if you asked pretty much anybody in the department, they were happy about the show.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it was a great way to reach out.
Good work, yeah.
The crime was going. Hey, fewer burglaries, fewer responses, fewer crime reports to take. They were happy about that. Chiefs were happy. The city council was happy. The residents, the community were happier. They were less victimized. So it was a win-win for everybody. But we were the first police department in the country to do it, and so I think back in the it sounds cliche now, or it sounds like, oh my God, it's almost old-fashioned to think what we were doing. But in 1985,
community policing was something.
Yeah, it was pretty cutting edge in 1985, and something that I just thought it was worth trying. And I had a very supportive police chief whose attitude was, what's the worst thing that can happen? Give it a shot. If it doesn't work, okay, but maybe it'll work. It worked. I did 1,200 Mondays.
One of the things, as someone who also for many years has sat up here in front of the cameras and interviewed a lot of people, frequently basically live, is that 90 minutes, a 90-minute show is a long damn time to be in front of the cameras trying to keep people entertained. So what were some of the things that you found? I mean, you were talking about maps and interviewing guests and stuff. Like what were some of the gimmicks maybe that you came up with to keep people
First off, I was a complete idiot by suggesting 90 minutes. That was my idea. Because I remember thinking, well, how long is it going to take me to go through all the maps, take phone calls? I thought, 90 minutes. And everybody at the TV studio, this was done at Jones Intercable at the time. Now it's Spectrum, I guess.
Okay.
And we had our own little studio over there, and they looked at me like, 90 minutes? Are you crazy? Right. And we didn't take breaks.
Right.
And the first few shows, no one had thought about this, me included. They didn't think about giving me a chair. So I stood, and I had a podium, and this was probably the thing that interested people the most. I had a podium, and there's no computers back then that would do a map.
Right.
So I did it by hand. It was a 4-foot by 4-foot map of the city, and I would physically put like red dots, blue dots, green dots, yellow dots representing the different crimes. An hour or two before the show, I would go stick them on because I had a little printout of where all the crimes had happened. That was the number one thing about the show. And I would go neighborhood by neighborhood. So people who were watching would say, well, when's he going to get to my neighborhood? Okay, he's in the north end. I'm at the beach. He'll be talking about us in a few minutes. So they'd stay and watch. Right. And then the phone calls. And I remember the very first show thinking, who's going to call? And that was my biggest fear. How am I going to fill 90 minutes if it's just me
nobody
talking?
Calls? Yeah.
Nobody. What am I going to do? So I did what anybody might think about doing, and that is I probably should. I've never said this publicly, but I orchestrated a bunch of people. I said, hey, my wife. Look,
honey,
if you see me and I'm sweating profusely, and you notice that I'm not talking to anybody because there's no calls coming in, do me a favor. Call and ask me this question. And I had my neighbors, all geared up. I had friends. I had people in the department. I said, now, if the phone starts ringing, and I had plenty of calls, don't bother.
Right.
But they were my fallback position. But the 90 minutes flew by, and I think people, the two things, the maps and the prevention information we would put out based on what was happening currently right there in those neighborhoods, and then the ability to call and talk and ask questions.
Okay. Well, you've been talking about this. I know you're retired, but you've been talking about this in the past tense. Is there still an opportunity for people to see something like this?
They're not doing it anymore.
Why not?
I think you'd have to ask the management or
the
chief of police. I wish they would do it. It's not. I think they're a little intimidated by the amount of work that they consider it to be. And what I found, and I know you're going to agree with this, it wasn't much work. Live television drives itself. I wasn't writing 90 minutes of scripts every week. I never worked off a script in my life. I mean, it was all just like you do.
Like you're doing right now, yeah.
And like you do on this show. It's not scripted. So there was a little preparation. I had to put the map together. So maybe an hour or two a week. And I would like to see them get back to it, but there's been 2 or 3 more chiefs since I left, and different priorities, and for whatever reason they're not doing it.
Well, I mean, just suppose Chief's watching this right now. Would you do it again if you got invited back?
I don't know. I would have to think about it.
You would think about it, though.
Oh, I would. I enjoyed it.
This could be breaking news right now.
There you go. It was one of my favorite things about my job.
Okay.
The spokesperson role is a challenging one, and I used to tell people I felt like a man without a country. No one was happy with you.
Right.
The cops that I worked with all thought I said too much.
Okay.
The reporters I worked with all thought I said too little.
Right.
Nobody was happy. The only one that would talk to me really was my wife, and my kids. Somewhat. Not always. They were teenagers through some of this, but I just think it was a challenging thing. But would I do it again? I know it was one of the best things I ever did in my career. One of my favorite parts, and I think one of the most impactful things I did. But the spokesman role is a tough one. It is. I still watch the news occasionally, not as much as I used to. I don't have to watch it anymore. But when I see some major incident, and I watch the people that are speaking on behalf of whatever police department is involved, whether it be New York or Chicago or Los Angeles or a small local one. And I for the first few years, I would actually feel a little surge. I remember there was a train accident in Oxnard not long after I retired at like Rice and, this won't mean anything, but Rice and Fifth. There was a big train collision, some fatalities involved. And when I saw it in the morning, I actually felt myself.
You're ready to get up and go.
I was getting off my sofa. I was wearing my bathrobe, but I got to go.
You got to get out there.
And then I go, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch this thing unfold on the news. So it's in, and I think you know that. It gets in your blood.
It does,
and it's kind of, it just flows in you. And it took me a while to kind of calm down.
When you're watching other people do that, I mean, is there a sense where you think, this is just the right way to handle it? Because as you're saying, you're between a rock and a hard place, these two audiences.
Exactly.
Nobody's happy with you. What's the best way to do a job like that?
Boy, I'll tell you, you strike a balance. First off, you're always truthful.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean I told the audience everything I knew.
Sure.
Oftentimes, I went to 200 homicides over the course of my career. Sadly, it's a big city. It's 220,000 people in Oxnard. So we had our share of those kinds of things. So every time there was a homicide, I'd get called out and I would be briefed about what happened. And that's how these books came about.
And we're going to get to here
that's fine,
momentarily.
I would be briefed, and so I would know exactly what the officers and the detectives knew, but I couldn't go and explain in great detail to the cameras and therefore to the community what I had been told privately and secretly. Sure.
It's an
minutes
ongoing
before.
investigation.
It's an ongoing investigation. I know people think that's a cop-out, but there's a real value to keeping things close to the vest, and at least in the beginning. And that took some getting used to. It took me a while to figure out what can I say, what would ruin things. You don't ever talk about the caliber of weapon, how many times the person was shot. You don't talk about stuff that only the bad guy would know. Right.
And you just use that to catch the bad guy.
Exactly,
Right.
and so you learn that over time, and it was a challenging thing. The only restless nights I ever had in my career were media driven. Were just we had some major stuff going on. We had a kid. It was at E.O. Green School where one student shot and killed another one in a classroom during class. It made international news. Dateline and all those shows did hour-long specials on it. It was a huge story that happened. I remember February 12th, 2008. That was a tough one. And then we had an incident where a guy went into a local unemployment office in Oxnard and shot several people, killing a few, including one of our officers. Those are the things that you wrestle with. Those
it's not just the news,
Yeah, I mean, and it's personal. I mean, I lost 2 officer friends during my time. Officers shot and killed in the line of duty. One of them was in that unemployment office incident in 1993. Those are the ones that you lay awake at night thinking about. But it's part of the job. And I had a great marriage and wonderful kids, and I was able to go home. My wife learned, give me a little distance when I got home. Don't I don't want to talk about it right now.
You'll get to
And
it
in fact, I'm never going to talk about a lot of what I heard today. And she was really good at understanding about that. And I found the difference between men and women. I think women tend to talk things out a little bit better than men, and men keep it to themselves. And I fall into that. And so she, in the beginning, she'd say, "Well, you want to talk about it? You know, tell me what happened. What's bothering you? You'll feel better." And I'm like, no. And my comment was, no, I lived through it once. I don't want to live through it again. I'm going to forget it, which may not be the healthiest thing or healthiest way to handle it, but it's the way I personally handled it, and you know, it got me through okay. But those are all just things that you kind of roll with.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to use that now as a segue to these four
These crazy
novels here.
books?
Yeah, so it's the Jack Keller
Yeah.
is your character,
He is.
a sheriff's investigator in Colorado.
Yep.
Talk us from how you got to, we've just been talking about Street Beat and all the stuff, being an information officer, to being the author of a series of detective novels.
Well, first off, I was never one of those people that thought I was going to write the great American novel. I never had any dreams of that. I'm going to retire and write. I never thought about that. I had an incident happen when I was taking my wife and I were taking our youngest daughter on college tours, and we were heading down to San Diego, and we were nearly hit by a big semi going down the freeway. And as the semi barely missed us, I remember looking literally, I mean, it was just maybe a foot from I was the driver. I mean, it came right to the window and it went by us. And it said something about refrigerated on the side of the truck or frozen goods. And I remember, and I know this is bizarre and most people don't think this way, but I remember thinking, I wonder if you could put a dead body in that truck and freeze it and fool detectives as to the time of death, or we call it TOD. So one of the most important things a detective does when he or she first gets on scene is try and determine when the person died. It's sometimes very obvious. We get a call, there's a shooting in progress. Okay, you know what happened 10 minutes ago. Other times a body's discovered in an alley or in a parking lot or in a car or in a home. You don't know if he's been there 15 minutes or 15 days or longer. And so I got this idea, and I didn't say anything to my wife or my daughter, but we were going to San Diego. And by the time I got to San Diego, I had the idea for this book.
There it is.
And it's so stupid. I mean, I don't know why I thought of this. I think sometimes if that truck had not nearly hit us, I wouldn't have had the thought, I would not have these books.
Right.
It's just sometimes
It's
life.
that one single trigger. Okay.
Yeah, it was the trigger I needed. And so I got home a couple days later after looking at colleges, and I sat down at a laptop in my dining room, and I wrote the first 11 pages of this book. And I know you are a creative writing expert. I am not. And I know one of the things I'm sure you teach your students is, well, work from an outline and, you know, have an idea where you're headed with the book.
Sometimes you say that about a detective novel because it's a very complicated plot, right?
I knew nothing.
You just knew there was a body in a refrigerator.
There was a body. It was a really cold body, and we didn't know when it died, you know, kind of thing. And I get up each morning. I'm a morning person. I get up early at 5 a.m. or so, and I write till about 7 or 8 in the morning. Then I'm done. And I just started writing, and I didn't know, on any given day, I didn't know what the pages were going to be that I wrote that day. And over the course...
So you didn't know who did it?
No, I didn't. I didn't even know exactly how it happened. I just knew that this body is frozen. This is just something about this story idea. And I never dealt with that in my career. I never had that kind of case. So maybe that was part of the intrigue. So I started writing, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and then it ended up being a book. And I got it I self-published after looking at, this is really, Amazon was really the way to go. I mean, I highly recommend it for new authors. I read an article about John Grisham, who I love his stuff. Obviously, arguably one of the more successful authors of the last 30 or 40 years. And he wrote a great book called A Time to Kill, his first novel. Ended up being a motion picture and phenomenal success. Maybe the best book he ever wrote. First novel. And he said that he had been turned down by 17 publishers. So he published it himself, and he sold it out of the trunk of his car. He'd have a big box of them, and he'd go around until finally somebody read it and said,
hey,
this is really good.
Right.
No one said that to me yet. They don't want to make a movie of it, although this would be a very good movie. All the Santa Barbara people who are in the movie business, you're here on the weekend, call me. Everybody I've talked to who's read this has said this would be a superb movie. So I went ahead and did it, and I thought maybe I'd sell 20 copies. I thought, you know, my kids might buy one, and I sold several thousand copies. Which
is about the run of a small publisher.
and I just got a lot of attention. I got on the LA News with it, and I think they like the idea of a former police spokesman
Yeah, well, let me ask
doing
you
this.
a little bit about the writing process
Yeah.
because you're talking about getting up here and talking for 90 minutes for years and years. But did you also do a lot of writing during the course of your job too?
I didn't write anything.
Okay, you just
press
wrote-
release, which I purposely kept as short as possible.
Okay.
A paragraph,
Right.
3 paragraphs if it was a murder or something complicated. No, I think the longest thing I'd ever written in my life was a term paper in college. Many, I mean, 35 years ago,
This
40
is
years
great
ago.
news for everybody watching who wants to write a book.
Look,
and doesn't
I'm an
have-
idiot. I did it. You can do it. And I do encourage people. I found everybody I've talked to who's kind of done something similar has been surprised by some level of creativity that they did not know
in there
that they had. I didn't know I could ever do this. I thought I probably learned some creativity on the job because I had to be a little creative sometimes with how I approached stories, dealing with the community and having to think quickly on your feet day in and day out for 28 years. I think that helped me a lot with this. But yeah, if you're someone with an idea for a book or a short story or a poem, do it. I mean, absolutely do it. I had no idea that this would work out, and it worked out well, and it led to a second book and a third book and a fourth book, and I'm just about finished with a fifth book. And it just keeps me busy and keeps me out of trouble.
One of the ways that I think people who have a natural gift like you do, but haven't done a lot of writing, is that they've also done a lot of reading in that genre. So were you a big reader of detective novels? No?
Nope.
TV shows?
No, I stay away from them.
So you're just going basically from your career
Correct.
in law enforcement.
Yeah, I saw enough. I always told people that basically I had a front row seat to several hundred very interesting stories.
Okay.
And I did. I mean, I was told everything. I had to know everything because I had to talk intelligently about it to large groups of people or through the media.
Right.
So I think having a front row seat, I had a perspective that very few people have, and I was very fortunate in that. I didn't know it at the time that it would lend itself to this. I thought my plan to retire was to play golf and travel with my wife, and I don't know, just go mess around. I don't know. I was just going to go have fun, and then this stupid truck went by me and lets you know I'm sitting here with you talking about that.
We just got about 4 or 5 minutes left, but for people who are like, okay, I see Betrayal, I heard about that one. Can you quickly run us through a kind of a thumbnail version of each of the subsequent books?
Well, yeah, this one is about a frozen dead guy. This one was my second one, and this is actually probably the one I liked writing the best. It was the most fun, and it has to do with, it's called Hard Landing. All these are available on Amazon, and it has to do with investigators finding a deceased young woman in a tree, high up, stuck in a tree. How did she get in that
That's
tree?
a great, yeah, okay.
And there's a whole story to how I came up with that. But this is, I just love writing this one.
How did you come up with that?
The idea came to me driving to Las Vegas. Maybe I should drive more. I mean, it's always
seems
in the
like it's a-
car.
yeah.
My wife and I were heading to Las Vegas, and I looked out somewhere around Baker, that big thermometer bun boy
Right,
thing,
sure, yeah.
and I looked off, and there's nothing out there. I mean, there's nothing out there. I remember thinking, you could drop a body out of an airplane and land it out in the middle of the desert, and first off, it would take a while probably to be found because not like anybody's driving by, and even if it was found, there'd be no tire tracks, there'd be no footprints, there'd be no evidence around the body. And one of the first things detectives do, obviously, is they collect evidence all around a body when they discover one. There would be no evidence, so it intrigued me. So by the time I got to Vegas, an hour and a half later, I had the idea for this one. So that one I wrote in 2016, I think.
Okay.
And then this one is about an officer-involved shooting. I handled 15 of them in the course of my career. They're very controversial. It's very much newsworthy, and so I got frustrated sometimes with the way the media and the community understood how an officer-involved shooting might happen, and the aftermath. So this one really was, I don't know. It just was kind of I don't know, it helped me to write this book.
Okay.
So that's a third one. That one did well. This one I just finished, and it just came out a few months ago in November. It's doing very well, and it's about a crazy guy who does something, and a person's head. I sound so crazy when I say this, publicly. A person's head was discovered in a box inside the police station.
Okay. That's another good mystery.
On the top shelf, by the way.
All right.
And it ends up, there's a fishing boat involved in Mexico, and it goes all over the place. It's kind of crazy. So those are the 4 books. They've done really well. I've been so pleased with it. I'm working on a 5th book, and very quickly, I decided to take a break from, and these are all the same characters.
Right,
same,
Jack Keller.
Yeah, Jack Keller and cast of characters. I decided to write something different, and I have no business doing this. But I'm writing, and I'm actually almost done now, with a romantic comedy.
Oh, wow.
I have no idea. But I just sat down, and it's actually been the easiest book I've written. I started it around Thanksgiving. So 2 months later, and I've written about 240 pages. I got about another 50 or 60 to go. I should finish it in the next 10 days.
Wow.
And it flew out of me, and I don't know why. But that's another example. You talked about the creativity thing, and it's inside, and you encourage people to let it out, and that's a good example. I had no idea that I could do that.
Throughout the interview, you've been mentioning your wife, and she's obviously a really powerful and steady presence in your life.
Yes.
It's a good reason to write a romantic comedy, I'd say.
I let her
This
read
is
it
for
too.
you.
And she reads. I write 10 or 15 pages. I give it to her, and then she reads it, and then she says, "Yeah, this was good," or "I didn't like this," or "I didn't whatever." And so she's been a good. I won't say critic, but she's been a good, she critiques it for me.
She's been a good wife.
Yeah, and by the way, my youngest daughter, who was hilarious, she reads all my stuff too, and she has a lot of fun with it. And my books are not even PG; they're G.
Okay.
A couple words, it's got to be realistic. But I like to tell the story of her reading one of my books, and I talk about a sex scene. It's not a sex scene. There was a couple, and and she read this, and she says, "Oh my God, I got to gouge my eyes out. I cannot believe my father is written." I go, "It's tame. It's tame." She goes, "No, Dad, it's not tame if you wrote it. It's tame if anybody else wrote it. But you wrote it, no way." And I think she had a strong reaction to it. But she's been terrific about it.
Oddly, we're going to have to end on that note.
There you go.
It's been a great pleasure talking to you, David.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
me. It's been fun.
I've really enjoyed it. The Creative Community is a co-production of CAPS Media in Ventura and TVSB in Santa Barbara. I'm your host, David Starkey, and thanks for watching.